Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the Global Relay of Terra Madre 2020, a virtual journey in 5 different parts that across continents and time zones. This is a global dialogue on the big question of our age with experts coming from all over the world. I am Eddie Muchivi, the Vice President of Slow Food International and the Coordinator of Slow Food Activities in Uganda, and I will lead you through the second step of this journey that will take place in Africa, our mother continent. We will talk about migration and its underlying causes. Africa is one of the richest continents in terms of natural resources and natural assets. The biggest continent in terms of cultivable land, as well as the continent which is rich in terms of young generation of the population. It's a continent where the population is generally young and then energetic, but at the same time, there are quite a lot of people from Africa, a lot of people from Middle East that leave their mother continent and travel across the dangerous journeys to find life elsewhere. So the big question is what actually forces these people, the young generation of Africa, the young generation of Middle East, to leave their homeland to find livelihoods elsewhere. We will talk about this topic with 3 of my colleagues, with Agnes Chirabo, the Executive Director of Food Rights Alliance from Uganda, as well as Mary from Kenya, and Saad Daga, an agronomist from Palestine. Our first speaker will be Agnes, who is the Executive Director of Food Rights Alliance from Uganda. She has done quite a number of advocacy works on the right to food, the right to good food. She also she has also worked a lot on food governance. She's a food activist from Uganda, making sure that everybody has access to good, clean, and fair food. Agnes, the big question today is what has gone wrong with the management and the governance of African resources that forces many people to leave the continent? What could be the driving force behind this migration of young people from Africa to go and look for a livelihood elsewhere?
Thank you so much, Eddie, and good morning, good day, and good evening, and good everything to whoever is listening and watching us. And welcome to Africa. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you so much for the great introduction of the subject. Africa is a resource-rich country, and everybody knows that. And Africa is a people-rich continent, and everybody knows that. But I think I have taken time ever since I was invited to be part of this conversation, reviewing global literature around migration. And we all appreciate that there is inter and intra-migration. But I'm also happy that we chose to have a conversation on this issue. Why should somebody leave a place called home and go to an unknown place to live? I think this is a very painful decision, but we need to understand that they are pushing but also pulling factors. The interesting thing I have also confirmed with my experiences, that the pulling factors mirror the pushing factors. It is either bad from the source and seemingly better to the destination. And you would realize that Africa, we have failed to turn around the resources that we do have and create opportunities, and actually better opportunities for our people. We need to understand that the underlying people always talk about, I'm going to look for something to eat. If it is not eating for him or herself, she or he is taking that big risk to find food for his or her people or her children. This is very sad because Africa, we are not only rich in natural resources, we are also rich in biodiversity. And so many people have written about poverty, they have written about employment, they have written about demographic factors, they have written about all those things you have had as pushing factors that are pushing. Increasingly, not surprisingly, we had known of migration by the young people. But now even us, the old, wish to migrate. And with all the literature that I have reviewed, I have not found where it has significantly been written about the governance question in Africa. The governance question has been sugar-coated to look at governance from the political point of view. And those of us who are in these other social, economic, cultural issues, we have ignored the political terrain, the political governance, and yet the governors of politics are the ones that are determining who is having resources and who is denied of resources. So we have seen now the governors, they are the chief orchestrators of land grabs. You may have seen an article going around by one of our comrades in the struggle, talking about land grabs at gunpoint. Civilians don't own guns. It is the governors with the guns, and now they are grabbing every single resource and denying the people resources. That's one thing. The other issue, again related to governance and the distribution of resources. The markets have failed. The markets are no longer enabling smallholder farmers to see food leave their farms and therefore reach the consumers. And the young people cannot be part of that crop of producing and investing, and you do not know what your returns shall look like and who is going to be your consumer. Therefore, they have to look for cheap and other options. Look at the governance of the resource flows. Who is getting the money and who is not getting the money? If you just take a case of our own country, where I'm coming from, Uganda, the biggest proportion of the budget is going to security and defense. And the next is paying loans, interest on loans that we have as a country. But defense to defend what? Defense not even to defend the resources or even the people, but defense to defend the governor in the political decisions. So for me, I think when we are having the conversation on migration, we need to interrogate how is Africa's resources being governed? Who determines who is going to govern? How are the governors creating opportunities for the people and not for themselves? How are the governors determining where the people will eat, and if they are going to eat, what are they going to eat? How can you swim across an ocean to find a meal? And from Africa, you swim across the ocean to find a job. From Africa, a resourceful continent as we talk about it. So until we cross the lines and get out of the comfort of talking and complaining about like personally, you'll always find me struggling. How are people not eating? But I think we need also now to start cross the line and also join the struggles to question how Africa is being governed. And we fail on this, people are going to move, and they are moving where the governance question has greatly been checked. And therefore opportunities, there is some bit of equity in the distribution of opportunities. There is sense in creating livelihoods. There is really a concern of the governors that people live in dignity. So Our people are left with no choice to live a non-dignified life. You try elsewhere because living in dignity is an inherent. You're not told, you feel it and you go out and vie for it.
Thank you so much, Agnes. Actually, it's really important that to address the question of migration, it's important to address the question of resource governance, because many young people are left without resources. The resources are all going into the hands of a few individuals who have power. This cuts across Africa and also in the Middle East, where we see a lot of young people left with no places to grow their crops or to raise their sheep or cattle or anything. So in many cases, the resources are embedded in the hands of the few people. And then the first thing is people to leave their home community to go to the next or the nearest town. And when the opportunities in the nearest town dwindle, they look for life elsewhere. And also, in many cases, when resources are not well governed, it leads to a state of food insecurity. It leads to a state where people cannot feed themselves, where people cannot feed their families. Connecting directly to resource governance and food security, I would like to invite our second speaker, Mary Abukta from Kenya. She's a biological researcher. She has done tremendous work on tremendous research on indigenous biological resources like vegetables and the like. So, Mary, the floor is yours. How do you think? How is this question of migration related to food security in relation to what Agnes has talked about, where resource governance leads to this state of food insecurity? How is it related, and what can we do to improve the situation? Mary, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for this opportunity to share my ideas in this panel discussion on migration and its underlying causes. First and foremost, I just want to, as an introduction, to say that migration basically is a movement of people from one place to another with the intent to settle. In your introduction, you basically talked about migration from developing to developed countries. But I want to say that there are many types of migration. The intra-country migration, like rural to rural areas, rural to city, and vice versa. And we also have inter-country migration, developed to developing countries. And I would like to say that this migration also from developed to developing countries. And there are also very many reasons for this migration. And just to highlight, many people say migration is because of employment opportunities or lack of opportunities for those who are migrating, looking for better education, and because of globalization, natural disasters, need for resources, as my colleague has said, and sometimes lack of food and nutrition security, like not having adequate foods. And this has been actually witnessed in many African countries and the Middle East. And then we find that when you come to natural resources, we need to share these natural resources in a way that is equitable, but this is not the case, as has been highlighted. Land is a key natural resource that can be used for food security and nutrition in Africa and Middle East, but we find that this resource is not actually optimally used because of poor governance, as has been highlighted. However, this resource is very key, especially in Africa and Middle East, because we need to use this resource optimally to increase food production food and nutrition security. Now, I want to say that when there is migration, food and nutrition security is one of the key basic needs, and it's a right to every human being. So when you are migrating, either looking for a job, looking for opportunities, for education, at the end of the day, the first basic need is to ensure that the household, the individuals, or even the people in a nation or a continent like Africa and Middle East also have enough food, good food, and also the food is nutritious, is accessible, and can be utilized in a way that can bring better lives to the people. At the end of the day, we find that in Africa and Middle East, if we talk about development, if we talk about migration, we must ensure that we are having the best food that will give us good health. Even for any development to occur in these areas, we must have people who are healthy and well nourished. And that's why the consideration of food and nutrition security during migration is very key. Whether you are moving from developing or developed countries, from Africa to Middle East or to developed countries, you need to consider, if I move from Africa, or if I move from my home country, if I move from Middle East to somewhere else, am I going to have food available to me? Am I going to access this food for me and my family? Am I going to utilize this food in a way that it will give me the best nutrition and health? And then there's recently a new aspect of food safety, especially when you have issues of people moving from rural areas to cities or even any other part of the country, whether developed or not developed. There's an issue of food safety which has come up strongly in Africa and Middle East, because we have so many foods that are being sold, let's say on the streets, in cities and other areas all over. That's an area that also, as you migrate from one place to another, regardless of where, you must remember that the food safety is very important. Can I get this food or at all times when it's needed for my family or for the nation or for the people in a particular area? Then the other issue that is very important is to look at the food production. Now, food production is very important because you must have food. When you're migrating or when you're moving from one place to another, you must be thinking, am I moving to a place where I'm going to buy food, access through food production, or am I going just to buy it from the supermarket? So I want first of all to talk about food production as Africans and also for people from Middle East, because we need produced food. As my colleague has said, Africa is actually endowed with a lot of resources, land, and young people. So we have a potential to produce enough food within Africa. And that's why we say that we have to look at how do we ensure there is food production, enough food that will feed not only Africa, Middle East, but the world at large. And that's how you look at, are we going to produce this food under commercial production? Are we going to use technologies that are appropriate to Africa and Middle East, or are we going to borrow other technologies? And in this case, I'm talking about mechanization, I'm talking about control environment production. There's a talk about food factories. There are technologies that exist that we can exploit in Africa and Middle East to produce enough food for Africa and Middle East and the world. And some of these are technologies where you have control environment, you have also using the control environment like greenhouses and food factories. Now, the other thing I want to point out that in Africa and Middle East, I know that we have foods we call indigenous foods. I've done a lot of work on indigenous food in Africa, but Middle East, I know every continent, every area has indigenous foods. And some of these indigenous foods have been neglected to contribute to food security in Africa and Middle East. And it's an area that we need to actually to exploit. As much as we are looking at other exotic and international foods that are across the continent or the whole world, we need to look at what are the rich resources that are in Africa that we can exploit? What are the natural foods? What are the indigenous foods in Middle East that we can exploit that have been neglected? Some of these foods, for my research, has been shown that some of the indigenous foods have a competitive advantage over even exotic foods in terms of nutrition, in terms of resilience to growth in various climatic conditions. And as we know now, as we talk about production of food in Africa and the Middle East, we must remember that there's issues of climate change. Some of the indigenous food have shown resilience to some of these changes or stresses of production. So we must also ensure that our young people in Africa and Middle East are educated, are also told that actually Africa and Middle East are the key areas that we can exploit and introduce some of the technologies, because these young people are running to Western countries or the other countries because they think that they are more developed. But I think we can introduce some of these technologies within Africa. As I said earlier, we have technologies that we can use to attract the young people so that they don't run away. I know that many of the young people actually, as I speak now, because I teach at the university, they don't like agriculture. But if we make it more technology-based and make it more attractive, we'll find that most of our young people who are migrating to Western countries will focus and come back to Africa and help us produce this food. So the issue is to entice them, to educate them, to sensitize them to the real riches and opportunities we have in Africa. So in essence, food security and nutrition is very important. It's one of the key areas that we need to focus in for Africa and Middle East so that we can develop the next level, because a hungry person cannot be able to develop. So food security and nutrition is an area that is very important for us in Africa and Middle East so that we can produce enough food for food security, for nutrition, and also for the well-being of all our population, and even further to contribute to this issue of food security and nutrition globally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. That's a very powerful submission. Picking right from there, it's important to note that there is a very big connection between migration, land grabs, and food insecurity. Many people, like you have mentioned, they move in search for safer food, in search for food, actually, because in many cases, people leave places where the seeds have been taken over by the corporations, the land has been grabbed, and then families cannot be sure that they will eat tomorrow. So at the end of the day, when there is food insecurity, people are forced to leave from one place to another in search for a better way of living. You also mentioned something really important on food safety. In some places, especially where the agricultural land has been turned into mining places or oil exploration, petroleum exploration places, you find that the soils in that place, the natural resources like rivers, lakes, they have lost their safety. So because of the residues from many large-scale agricultural products, as well as mining and other economic activities. So the land becomes unsafe for people to have food. And in the end, people abandon their land and they find life elsewhere. The good thing is there are quite a lot of people out there who are doing a lot of work with the communities to reverse the situation. To reverse the situation on seeds where the many lands have been invaded by GMOs. There are quite a lot of interesting people who are trying to reverse the GMO situation to give the communities the seed sovereignty they deserve. There are many people who are changing the production systems to more agroecological production systems to ensure food safety, to ensure food security and food sovereignty to those people, as well as to protect the biological resources. I will jump straight to Saad. Saad Daga is an agronomist from Palestine. He has done tremendous work on agroecology, as well as fighting for food sovereignty for people in different communities in the Middle East. Saad, it would be very interesting to share, for you to share some of the positive actions you're taking in your communities together with quite a lot of young people to reverse this situation of food insecurity, as well as to make sure that people utilize the resources they have, the meager resources they have. So I would kindly request SAD to give an overview of the positive actions which are taking place in the Middle East, in your home community, in your home country, that all of us can borrow a leaf and see how we can deal with this crisis. It's your floor, SAD.
Thank you, Eddie, and it's a pleasure to be with you, with all of you. And I don't know what to say after I already have heard from these two powerful women. Thank you, Agnes. Thank you, Mary. Yes, in Palestine, in the last years, we were able to spread agroecology in a way that we made it actually attractive to young people and to women also at the same time. So more young people now are doing agroecology in Palestine, and it became really attractive. And in this case, we noticed that less young people who, or at least those people who are doing agroecology in their villages, in the rural areas, they even don't think about migrating from their villages to cities or even outside the country. Yeah, it was a very hard path that we went through in the last 20 years, but finally I can say that we have established an agroecological movement in Palestine, and it's now becoming stronger and stronger. Maybe also I will talk about some other issues, not only about Palestine, because I think that agroecology can be the milestone to solve other problems, not only migration, because in many countries in the Middle East, we are noticing wars now. You see the war in Syria, in Iraq, in Palestine. We face in Palestine a very difficult situation with the Israeli occupation, with land confiscation. We don't have this problem with land grabbing. We have problem with land confiscation. So by the Israeli occupation. Most of people are thinking that we don't have enough resources, and in our area also they think, or people think that we don't have enough water resources. From my opinion, we don't have that big problem with water, but we have problem with dealing with water, because we have in many places we have enough rainwater, but we don't use this rainwater in a good way, in a way to be productive. More than 70% of rainwater we lose, and it goes to the sea. And if the water goes to the sea, it means that we don't utilize it. We don't use it to produce food. Also, we have mainly in our area chemical farming. I can say I call it chemical farming, not conventional farming, because many people they use the word conventional farming, but the right name is to say chemical farming. And chemical farming leads to monoculturing. When you use chemicals, immediately you grow one crop. You are not diversifying your farm, and this way also you are not producing enough food. In Palestine now we produce less than 7% of our needs from wheat, for example, and we eat a lot of bread. We use wheat in everyday life, but we don't produce wheat. So now we are importing wheat. although in the past, maybe some 50 years ago, we used to produce enough wheat for our own consumption, and in some years we had even extra, and we were able to export wheat. So there is a shift in agriculture now, and most people are looking for new technologies and new agricultural practices, using, for example, hydroponic. In many places it became a fancy issue now, and I don't think that hydroponic, for example, and monoculture is a way to produce enough food. But agroecology could be the way to produce first enough and diversified food and good food. That's what we are aiming at, to produce good food. As I said, in our area we have a very unstable situation, and people always thinking about scarcity. And I keep saying that there are some forces that pushing us to think this way, that we don't have enough resources. Agroecology actually can be a solution for many other problems: migration, food insecurity, environmental issues, and water issues. Because by applying agroecological methods in agriculture, we also use less water, much less water. I think if we establish a strong agroecological movement in Palestine, we can also influence, and that's what's happening now, we can influence other people in other countries in the Middle East to create an agroecological movement in the region. And through agroecological movement, we start seeing abundance, or as I say in Arabic, al-baraki. Al-baraki, it means blessed abundance. So if people start to see al-baraki in everything, in all resources that we have, then there will be no need for war, no need to go and fight for resources, for water, for food, or for land. We have enough water, as I said. We have enough land now. We have biomass which we can use. We have manure, animal manure we can use also, and we can bring back our traditional seeds. We are losing our local seeds, but now there is also a movement to bring back all traditional seeds in order to build a resilient agricultural sector, not that one which is dependent on external inputs. I can also say that in the last months, after the epidemic, after the COVID-19 crisis, I can say many people they noticed that with agriculture, with agroecology, we can sustain our life, and we can also solve our problems. Because in the last months we had lockdowns in Palestine, and people were not able to move. So there was an issue of food supply, and the main let's say tool to solve this problem was agroecology. And people started to think deeply about growing their own food, because most of rural people, they lost the knowledge how to grow their food. But during the lockdown, they started to look for knowledge. So I think what we need is an agriculture that is knowledge-based, not necessarily all the time technology-based agriculture, but knowledge-based agriculture, which means that we have to strengthen our knowledge in the field of agroecology in order to produce our food without depending on external inputs and without also depending on energy and imported technologies. And we succeeded. We have examples in Palestine where we succeeded to produce more than enough from the same area where people used to produce chemical products, to use chemical agriculture. So this is what actually we need. Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, thank you, Saad. That's really powerful. It's a very good example and inspirational story to share widely with everybody, with everyone, how thinking about knowledge-based agriculture can turn around things, how building a movement from the ground can turn around things and prevent the migration crisis, because you will ensure in this working through agroecology, you ensure that people have seeds every season. They don't depend on the externally controlled seed resources. Again, they have safe, nutritious food, diverse food, and also young people can utilize the little resources they have very well. So it's really a very important submission. First of all, I would like to thank all the speakers for these great submissions. From the big question which we asked at the beginning about what really causes people to move from one place to another. From land grabs, poor resource governance, having all resources concentrated in hands of a few people, which actually leads to people to move in search for better resources or in search for off-land opportunities. Then again to problems like food insecurity, because when all these problems come together, people lose access to resources. There is when there is land confiscation, like in Palestine, which leads to less access to land and also build-up of monocultures. At the end of the day, food insecurity sets in. But the good thing is that somewhere, somehow, the people, African people, people from the Middle East, are trying to solve this problem right from the grassroots level, starting with community-based initiatives like building the agroecology movement in Palestine, fighting campaigns to stop land grabs and land confiscation, as well as strong campaigns in Africa by the Slow Food Network in Africa to stop GMOs from spreading and taking over the agricultural resources, the seed resources, and taking away the seed sovereignty for many African countries. These initiatives are going on, as well as promoting the knowledge-based agriculture as opposed to the resource-based agriculture. I think this is one of the ways how we can overcome the crisis, such that there is enough food, good food, diversified food through agroecology, and also building local capacity of players, grassroots players in resource management. Those are some of the most important things which Slow Food is trying to do to overcome this crisis of migration. We need to also think about defending our natural resources, because when you look at many places across the continent, across the Middle East, people are looking at confiscating resources and drive so many people out of land, out of lakes, out of oases, out of river marshes. So trying to continue with many campaigns, with grassroots initiatives that can stop these injustices is one of the ways we can stop the accelerated migration of people from one place to another. So thank you so much to our speakers. I want to remind you that the Tramadre Global Relay continues. We pass the floor to our colleague Marta Mesa for the next stop. That will be in Europe. Thank you for being with us. Viva Tramadre.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
And bye-bye.